Mark's here.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, dude. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Thanks for joining our show.
I'm thrilled to do it. I don't get to do this as often.
Mark is the first interview we're going to do in our new mentor series. So we've always said we want to have conversations with friends about money. And then once we realized we could actually talk to our mentors about money, it gave us the idea to start the mentor series. So this is very simple. This is when we talk to our mentors about money. They may not be on the same path as us or have all of the same views as us, but they have a ton of awesome wisdom and perspective to share with everyone. So today we are going to interview Mark Horstman from Manager Tools. Mark, first off, thanks for joining us.
I'm happy to be here.
We really appreciate it. We'd love to have you just start off by introducing yourself and telling our listeners a little bit about you.
Okay. So I'm the co-founder of Manager Tools, which is, I think, the #1 management podcast in the world. We never set out for that, but that's where we've ended up. We've been podcasting for 15 years now. And unlike most podcasts, we generally don't have ads in our podcasts because we have a management consulting firm called Manager Tools, built in part to satisfy the desire of people to hear more from us about our guidance about managing. My business partner, Mike Ozan, and I are classmates from West Point from a long time ago, 40 years ago, roughly. I originally grew up in Los Angeles. My dad was an executive. My mom was a homemaker. I have 3 brothers. I think I was raised middle class, maybe lower middle class. I don't know. We never went on vacations. It's different now today with eating out, but I think I can count on one hand the number of times that my family ate out as a kid. Spent 4 years at the military academy, 5 years in the Army serving our country. Got out, went to work at Procter & Gamble, sold toothpaste for a while, Crest toothpaste. Was pretty successful at that. Then left, was a recruiter for a couple of years. And for the last 30 years or so, I think 30 years is about right, I have had a management consulting firm. I've been the owner. For a long time, I had my own firm and built that up and then sold it. And Mike, who was my classmate, longtime friend, and at the time a client, when he was an executive at MCI, said, you know, we should do something now that you're retiring. We should do something to share your knowledge with people. He said, why don't we do a podcast? And if you'd ever told me we'd have millions of downloads every month all across the world and people would be begging us to travel to train them. And the whole point I sold my company the first time was I was tired of traveling. I'm fond of telling people that I had, at the time I retired, I had 11 million frequent flyer miles, which is too many, believe me, traveling around servicing clients. And I kind of don't want to spend more time at home. And the podcast gave us a chance to do that, never dreaming that we'd be ending up building another company around the podcast. The podcast became advertising. We didn't really intend it that way. The best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. And we've been doing that for the last 15 years.
That's awesome. So you mentioned a little bit about how you were raised and just sort of described it as, I think you said middle class or maybe even lower middle class. Yeah. What else do you feel like just how you were raised and the situation of that shaped your views on money?
No, I don't think I had a good relationship. Not to say I had a bad relationship with money. I mean, we got an allowance. People today will be amazed that it was, I think I got $1 a week, but that felt like a lot. I did recall at some point in my 30s, a long time ago, that my parents used to sit down periodically. That's the phrase in my head. And they had a checkbook. This is back when there wasn't credit cards really. And they had a checkbook and they went over bills. You know, they were paying bills together. And it was interesting to me that I recalled it as being periodically. What I now know is that they did that every month. But as a kid in school, I didn't really think about months. Time to me was school and summer vacation. I didn't think that, March didn't really matter to me particularly. I knew when football season was, but other than that, there was just school and there was summer vacation. But I would say that my parents, were like everybody else. I'm sure there were times when there was month left over at the end of the money, as the saying goes. But my dad spent 40 years with the same company, and they are now retired, happily, living on his pension in Savannah, Georgia. And I think, certainly I was raised with frugality and so on, but there wasn't any money to spend. The Army certainly didn't pay me terribly well, but I didn't really care. Procter & Gamble, I was fairly low level. I got promoted and I thought I was doing fine. I didn't start making money that I would consider to be especially wonderful, maybe until I started owning my own firm. That said, I would absolutely say that I was much more of a spender because I had discovered that I was quite good at bringing in revenue. If you'd ever told me, I'm an engineer by schooling, if you'd ever told me that my first job out of the Army would be in sales and that I would be the number one salesman in the country in my division of Procter & Gamble, and in the first year I'd have said, no, I don't want to be in sales. No. I was an engineer. I was good at leading people. So I was certain that I'd be in a manufacturing facility somewhere, but somebody saw something in me. And at some point I realized that if I wanted to make money, I could. And I think, to get to your point, I'm sorry I'm being so long-winded here, but I think that caused me then to say, I can have more money if I want it. I just work harder. And in fact, you could see that over the course of my career. So I spent what I had. Now, certainly I put money away for retirement and all that kind of stuff. Probably not as much as other people. I do remember, oh gosh, it's got to have been 30 years ago, reading the book about the millionaire next door, about how the way you become a millionaire is not to make money, but to spend a lot less than you have. And in fact, Maggie, the reason we're having this conversation is in part because I listened to one of your podcasts, got a real kick out of it, and realized that a great deal of the stuff I spend my money on, and by the way, I don't live extravagantly, was just stuff I didn't need. And in our podcast, because we provide guidance to people about their professional lives and their managerial lives, we make the case that one of the things we talk about is layoffs and financial downturns. And we made the case, this is probably in a podcast from 13 or 14 years ago, that if you get laid off, finances rule. And one of our core pieces of guidance in people's professional / personal lives was you've got to have 6 months worth of cash available to you in the event of a business disruption in your company that you have no way around and you get laid off. And we're not talking about people who get laid off because they're poor performers. Sometimes layoffs are deep. 2008 comes to mind, and good people get swept out with people that maybe weren't performing well. And those people who were performing well were thinking, oh, I'm fine. And the being fine, if you haven't taken control of your finances and had a budget and spent less than you earned, you're going to be in trouble. And people end up making poor decisions about their job search because they literally don't want to have to move. They don't want to have to they don't want to be foreclosed on. They don't want to deny, they don't want to be put in a situation where they can't afford, as I like to say, their addictions to food, clothing, and shelter.
So Mark, you talked about your history about how you changed your spending habits, but have your thoughts about the purpose of money changed over the years?
I don't know. I would say that I have a fairly broad economic idea. Money is just a source of exchange. And so let me put it this way. I have never been to Vegas, which is weird because I've been everywhere. But I have no desire to go. I suppose if I went, I would go and I would take $100 and I would lose $100. I have no desire to gamble for more money. I don't. But now, if you gave me a chance to gamble my money for time, oh, I would take that in a minute. I would risk my money for time. And I think that, to me, money is a secondary currency. The primary currency is time. What am I going to spend my time doing? Because I can spend my time making money. I'm not really a big fan of leisure. And in fact, I shared with Maggie that one of the things when I first started reading about the FIRE movement, the problem I had with it was the retire early part. I think it's fantastic. I mean, I really think, and I've since changed my mind because I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. The beauty to me of the FIRE movement is to teach young people that you can become rich without making a ton of money. And by rich, I mean, as the old saying goes, being rich is not getting what you want. It's wanting what you have and not attempting to gain more. So to me, the retire early thing bothered me because what I care about is time and productivity. I care about people achieving the joy of doing something for society, doing something for others to help the world become better. You know, there's a lot of talk in the world today about negativity. Oh, the world's going to hell and so on. But that's just not true. The data are overwhelming. Mankind, the arc of humankind in the last 10,000 years is toward greater wealth, health, safety. I mean, people worry about wars and so on, but the trends, the long-term trends are incredible. I think the data I heard recently was that the average poor person today is living as well as a middle-class person was 100 years ago. And the more productivity we get, I mean, if all humans were as productive as they could be, there wouldn't be any famine. There wouldn't be any poverty. And in fact, the definition of poverty constantly changes. The definition of poverty today includes owning a car, at least it does in the United States, which of course obscures the poverty, the wretched poverty that exists elsewhere. So in my mind, money is, it's not a scorecard because that sounds bad. I'm not interested in dying with a big scorecard. To me, money essentially signifies value, and it's a simple scorecard, much like profit is for organizations. It tells you how well you're serving the world. So money is necessary. And actually, I don't really think about money so much as I think about cash. But my job is to serve other people. And if I do it well, the capitalistic system that essentially is true in most of the world today will reward me. And I then can plow those rewards back into serving more people.
Yeah, it's so interesting. There's so many things that you just said, Mark, that I want to touch upon. But I'll just hit a couple of points just to kind of get you to dig in and elaborate a little bit more on a few things you said. So one thing you just said was just around the idea of, your job is to serve people. And you and I have had some very brief discussions around, the idea of retiring early and your view on kind of productivity and what you were just speaking about.
Right.
One thing that I think is just an interesting point, and I'm curious for your thoughts back on this point, is a lot of the views of people in the quote, FIRE, financial independence, retire early movement, a lot of those people's views, and I know Mike and I feel this way, is it's actually less about true retirement. When we say retire early, it's not actually what many people think of when they hear retirement.
Right.
It's more retiring from the types of jobs we have now that are incredibly demanding, leave us very little time with our families and for other passions and hobbies. And it's more around having some flexibility and freedom to serve people in different ways.
Yes, I would completely agree with that. And again, as I said, my first response was that that's been attenuated, and you've shared with me your approach, and I think that's good. I would make a slightly counter argument, and that is this, and I'll tell a story about myself that's not flattering. I did pretty well in school. I did well, and I used to think I was pretty smart, and all the indicators that society gave me said, hey, you're pretty smart. When I was 25, and I was in the Army, I thought, man, I'm pretty smart. I know some stuff. And then I turned 30, and I discovered when I was 25, I didn't know a damn thing. I was an idiot. But at 30 now, I know some stuff. I'm pretty smart. And then I turned 35, and I discovered, oh dear, I thought I knew something when I was 30. I didn't know anything. But now at 35, I know something. And I did that for a few more years. And then finally, when I was 45, I realized, okay, you're never going to know anything. Yes, you need to learn more constantly. And I read constantly. I read a couple of hundred books a year. As you know, in my job, I write millions of words over the course of my career. And I attempt to spread that knowledge as best I can to other people. And of course, the podcast is free. But what I would say is I would hate to think, and I know that now, but when I first learned about FIRE, I said, oh dear, heaven forbid we have people thinking about retiring when they're 45. And so this is it's a minor quibble, but I don't want people thinking about retiring when they're 45. You're right, Maggie. I completely agree with your point. Now I want you to be able to retire. I do. Right.
Yeah.
And in fact, the financial independence thing, gee whiz, to be granted freedom, as so many people are in the world today compared to hundreds of years ago, to be granted freedom and then to feel that you're not free because you're tied to a job is a bad thing. I want people to be free. I want them to have enough cash and enough retirement savings and to figure out how they can live frugally so that they can, so that they are free of that burden, so that no layoff, no disruption, no discontinuity will affect their state of mind, and so they can continue to serve. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, service is bound up in their role, in their job, which of course has an associated income stream. I would argue further, though, that if you're 45 and you retire from what you described, Maggie, as a grueling job and so on, I would say grueling is not good. But I would hate to think that there are 45-year-olds who are, no offense, if people are going to take this wrong, but if you know me, I don't concern myself too much with all of the naysayers who tell me I'm wrong on this point or that point. I have a point of view, I believe it, and so I'm going to share it. But a 45-year-old person is just beginning to understand. Really, this is my experience now. If you're 30 and you think you know everything, good for you. When you turn 45, send me an email, ma.horstman@manager-tools.com. And I know the first words were, hey, you were right. And at some point, the knowledge and the lessons that we learn catalyzes into some wisdom. And it's wisdom we want to share with other people. Knowledge is good. Wisdom is better, an order of magnitude better. And I would hate to think that the learnings that someone got through the course of their career or their job or their vocation or whatever it is somehow less easily spread because they are less fully engaged. So I want everybody to have financial independence. And I believe the FIRE movement gives people the opportunity. And it's about cutting your spending. It's as simple as that. I think I've told you before, Maggie, that one of my favorite quotes is from Dickens, Mr. Micklethwaite, who says, annual income, 20 pounds, annual expenditure, 20 pounds, 6 shillings, result, misery. Annual income, 20 pounds, annual expenditure, 19 pounds, 6 shillings, result, happiness. To be clear, I don't blame society for the ads it throws at us about the new car or the new clothes or you need to look this way or you need to be thinner and spend more time at the gym and spend more on your gym membership and so on. That's not society. Society wants to put those out there. We're responsible for our own choices. And so what I would say, particularly to young people and even to people who are older, you can take control of your spending. And you can have an incredibly fantastic experience discovering, as I have, that the joy doesn't come from spending. You can have more joy from feeling secure, feeling financially independent. But I don't want people to think, I just need to get out of the rat race. First of all, if you're in the rat race, that's a choice you're making. your job doesn't need to be grueling. And Maggie, you've listened to our podcast, so you know your first responsibility is your family. If you were in a job that causes you to spend so much time that you can't spend time with your family, that's your choice. Get a different job. Don't say, I put my family first, and then complain that you're working 80 hours a week, because there are jobs that may not pay as much and you'd have to cut your expenses more, but you can put your family first. I like to tell stories of U.S. presidents who go home and have dinner with their family every night, admittedly in the executive residence, but and by the way, the president's pretty busy. In my mind, financial independence is crucial. And when people begin to feel that way, I've seen it. It is heavenly. It's joyous. But the answer is not to make more money. Certainly if money, and I talked about time earlier, the amount of money you want to make bleeds into the time you ought to be spending with your family. But I think that money and time and the feelings we have about those things are all related. And what we're talking about here, what I'm talking about when I think of money and time and family and so on, I think about choices we make. And I think too many people spend their time thinking, I'm in this job. You know what? I'm unhappy now. But boy, when I get that next job, that next promotion, that next raise, then I'll be happy. And the problem is, you know, as I like to tell people, if you're 20 and you're doing a job you don't like, because you think you'll be able to get to the point where you'll be 30 and you'll have a job you like, two problems with that. One, you may not get to 30 and you may not get to that job, but you will have been unhappy when you're 20. And then we get into the whole emotional decision about whether you're happy. Too many people associate happiness with things. And as I like to tell people, if you're not happy on the inside, we say it all the time in our podcast, happiness is an inside job. There is no external thing that will make you happy for any length of time. But financial independence can relieve so many people of their anxieties. And in my estimation, and I don't know this topic as well as you guys, the entire solution to financial independence in most first world countries is to massively cutting your spending.
Mark, you said something that I've been thinking about. You said something early in your answer, and I've been thinking about a lot. I'm 37. Are you telling me I don't have it all figured out right now?
Oh, no. Dude, I'm almost 60. I don't have it all figured out. The amount of knowledge in the world is expanding so fast that any one human being is always getting further and further away from knowing stuff, right? The world's just growing faster and faster and faster. So now, well, let me put it this way, Mike. You're much wiser than I was when I was 37. Did you think you were kind of knowledgeable when you were 30? If you did, that's great, but you're a lot more knowledgeable now. So I would say, no, you probably don't. And my parents, who were 85 and 87, would probably shake their head and go, yeah, you think you know something, but you really don't. And to me, I'm probably a little bit more into my job than some people because I feel like it's a calling. And believe me, I get emails every week saying, it's a calling, don't stop. I think that the moment I step out of it, my ability, because there are demands put on me to stay current, I believe those demands are helpful to me in terms of expanding my knowledge, expanding my wisdom. I don't want to work forever. And full disclosure, in case anybody's thinking, wow, Mark works really hard. He's one of those guys that he's addicted to his job. Folks, just to be clear, I play 200 rounds of golf a year. So I don't know anybody who plays that much, and I work full time. Now, admittedly, my kids are all gone. My wife and I have 7 kids. They're all out of the house. And so every afternoon at 4:00, after being at my desk since 6, I can go play golf. And I live 50 yards from my golf course, although it's not open right now, which is a source of great frustration for me. But I would just say to you, if your experience, Mike, is anything like mine, when you get to 45, you'll discover, yeah, I didn't know as much as I thought I did. And I think I finally accepted that's a good journey to be on. learning more and sharing that learning, like you guys are doing with this cast, is one of the great joys, and I would argue part of the service to humanity that we all owe to one another.
Yes, very true. One thing that I do think is worth clarifying, Mark and Mike, is that one of the things that Mark did say is that I have more wisdom than you, Mike, because I'm going to be 40 this year. And so I've got at least a couple of, I've got a little bit more, just a couple more years of wisdom than you have.
The model breaks down when making distinctions like 1 and 2 and 3 years, Maggie. I'm sorry, in defense of Mike.
You clearly don't know Mike that well. That was one of our later questions, Mark, was who do you like better on the podcast, Mark or Maggie? I mean, wait, Mike or Maggie?
Yeah. What I would say about that is I feel like a politician being asked a gotcha question. And we wonder why politicians dissemble so much.
We did an episode where we interviewed our children about their views on money, and we asked them that same question, and it stumped all of them. None of them were really willing to answer it.
That's not true.
Yeah.
They all picked me.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say you asked your kids about money, and you know,
we did. We asked them about like legit questions about money, and it was hilarious.
Yeah, I think, look, money is a fairly, it's not a hard concept. It's not geometry. Most people don't understand the nature of money and currency. I mean, all you have to do is ask somebody, what is the velocity of money? And they have no concept. What is M1? And these are very, very important concepts economically. And we're all certainly living in a time of economics making a difference to us, but most people don't understand it. Most people think of money in terms of income.
Interesting. So one of the things you mentioned, Mark, is that you have 7 kids.
Yep.
I'm curious what you taught your kids about money and just sort of some of your views around kids and money.
Well, probably not enough. But I think I would make a distinction between what we taught them and what they learned. I have never lived extravagantly. Full disclosure, somebody's going to write in who knows me and say, hey, Mark had a Ferrari. I did for a number of years. And I paid $35,000 for that Ferrari, and I sold it for $75,000. So there you go. If you'd ever told me any time in my life, the only thing I ever desired other than my class ring from my academy was a Ferrari. And I assumed I'd never have one and kind of wrote it off until somebody told me, by the way, you're doing okay. You know, you could buy one of those 1986, 87 Ferraris. And I was just astounded. And it was cheaper than the Suburban my wife wanted to buy. So I bought the Ferrari. Have since sold it and now have an even cheaper car, a 65 Mustang. So I don't know how much we taught them. In fact, if I'm going to be hard on myself, I'll say I taught them very little. I taught them you don't get any extra allowance. I taught them we don't go out to eat. We're careful about our money. I didn't teach that. I assumed they learned it. We certainly weren't extravagant. I would give my kids feedback about saying they wanted something. I would point out toys that they had that they no longer use, that at the time they had it, it was the end of the world for them to get it. We probably overdid Christmas morning. So I don't think I taught them anything at Christmas morning about frugality. But I will say this, no matter what I taught them or what they learned, they're all independent and they know they have to pay their own bills. I haven't sat down with each one of them and say, where are you on your plan? And you do understand that you have to live on 70 or 80 or 90% of your money. And when you get a raise, don't immediately increase your standard of living. But I know enough about their finances that I'm pretty confident about that. But I don't know. That reminds me, I'll have to ask him.
So Mark, switching gears a little bit, you mentioned that you read 200 to 300 books a year. What are your all-time favorites and what would you recommend?
It's a totally unfair question, Mike, because there are categories. For instance, I'm reading War and Peace again because it's arguably the greatest novel in modern literature. I've probably read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, a couple of times. I've tried to read Faulkner, and I read Ulysses by James Joyce and didn't enjoy it, but I'm glad I read it. My favorite books of all time, golly gee. I can only tell you that I remember very clearly reading the Robert Ludlum books as a kid, fiction. And by the way, when I say books, the vast majority of books I read are business books. And if you ask me to pick the one business book that truly matters, I wouldn't pick mine. I'm very, very proud of mine. I'm happy to have people read The Effective Manager. But the greatest management book that has ever been written and has meant more to me in my career than any other book would be The Effective Executive by Peter Drucker. It's a fairly thin book, and it was written many years ago, but it is trenchant and beautiful even today. Probably the second most important business book is night and day different from The Effective Executive. It's written by Peter Drucker. Again, it's called Management. Effective Executive is maybe 150 pages. Management is about 400 pages. They're both absolutely fantastic. Drucker is a very dense writer, so most people don't like it, but if you're willing to put in the time, Effective Executive is sublimely good. In terms of business, another one that's very good is called Execution by a guy named Larry Bossidy, an outstanding book. I think How to Win Friends and Influence People is another hugely important book. Look, I'm famous for a talk I gave years ago at Harvard. I'm not famous, but I'm famous within our community. And the talk was called Horseman's Laws. And Horseman's first law, it's all about people. And the second law is more communication is better. I think there are a total of 8 laws. It really is all about people. And there are far too many technocrats in the world. And there are far too many people, for instance, who believe that politics should go away. Well, politics are nothing more than relationship effects in the workplace. And human beings are notorious for being somewhat rational and very much so emotional. And if you don't build relationships with people, you're not going to have as big an impact on the world. So How to Win Friends and Influence People, which I think was written nearly 100 years ago, is still hugely powerful. And I think I recently wrote to our community that of the top 10 books checked out in the history of the New York Public Library system, How to Win Friends and Influence People is number 7. And I think the first 3 are like children's books. I'm trying to think of some of the famous business books, maybe a Harry Potter book, which, by the way, Harry Potter is as good a series of books as I've ever read. I mean, and in fact, when the last Harry Potter book came out, we ordered enough copies for everyone in my family to read at the same time because we were afraid that we would fight over the book.
I like how we got from War and Peace to The Effective Executive to Harry Potter.
Yeah. I mean, my feeling is, in fact, I'll admit something. I've shared this with a lot of people over the years. I don't listen to podcasts. I'm pretty prolific in the podcast space, but I have no desire to listen, certainly not to my own, which I write and then talk about it. And I can't imagine I'd need to listen to it. Plenty of people send me critiques, so I don't need to do the critique myself. And the reason I don't is because it's slow. I mean, I can read much faster than I can listen to someone else. Even, and I struggle with listening at speed, 1.5 speed or 1.25. Some people listen even faster than that. I love the phrase, the person who can read and doesn't is no better off than the person who can't read. Reading is the fastest, at least now in this world today, the most efficient form of learning you have. And I think learning has become virtually free. Now, I would say to younger people who think that they don't need to read books because the internet will help them, you're talking about a completely different level of knowledge. The internet provides anyone to speak. It's a wonderful broadcast medium, but the lack of curation that is available to you in news and in knowledge more generally is a significant negative to thinking that you're going to learn about the world through online sources. For things to be valuable, as a general rule, it takes some serious thought behind the scenes and some organization. And so, yeah, I read a lot, and I could give you 100 more. I do remember my senior year at the academy when Hunt for Red October came out, and every one of my classmates and I read it. Now, full disclosure, don't anybody make a mistake. I didn't go to the Naval Academy. I went to the military academy, the Army one. But it was so good. It was such a good thriller and so full of trenchant stuff that I loved it. But as I like to tell people, my favorite book is the one I'm reading right now. And there's always another. And I actually would tell people my greatest fear when I was traveling for years, before the advent of Kindles, and now I use Kindle software on the iPad. And I would travel with a briefcase full of books. And if it was a really good book that I really wanted to read right now, I'd buy the hardcover, and I would sling that briefcase over my shoulder, and it probably weighed 35 pounds. And my greatest fear in traveling was to be in a foreign country serving a client and to run out of the books that I brought with me, because I wouldn't be able to read at night. And as a general rule, I'm sure I'm going to make more enemies with this, but your TV is the enemy of reading. So I've probably bought 5,000 books from Amazon. I'm sure they love me. And I probably have 500 to 1,000 on my iPad. And I probably have 30 or more that I want to read in the next couple of months.
Incredible.
I like your comment that your favorite book is the one you're reading right now.
Yeah.
I'll also add, I own and I've read The Effective Executive by Peter Drucker, because you recommended it many, many years ago. And a few of those others I've also read because you have recommended them over the years.
Now, the part of our website that we have a book list, and people say, well, what about this book? What about that book? I say, well, that book's not any good.
Yeah. And
So-
we'll put a link in the show notes to your book, The Effective Manager, also.
Oh, good. That'd be lovely.
And then also one thing that, just sort of a funny aside, and Mike can attest to this, but I actually had a question in here that we don't have to get to later on, like, who are some of your mentors? And I said he's probably going to say Peter Drucker. So you had already
Yeah,
gotten to Peter Drucker.
but it depends on how you defined mentor. I never met Mr. Drucker, and it's one of the sadnesses of my life, because I almost had an opportunity. If I'd have pushed hard enough, I probably would have been able to. And all I would have done is stammered in his presence. In fact, Maggie, when you said this is about mentors and I'm one of your mentors, it humbles me incredibly. I don't, my definition of a mentor is somebody who I don't think of podcasting as making me, our guidance for hundreds of thousands of people. I think we've been downloaded now 250 million times. I'm sure there's some people who say, oh yeah, Mark Horstman's one of my mentors. And I would say, I've never even met you.
That's what's so amazing about podcasting.
Yeah. And technology. Yes.
Yeah. You have millions of mentees out there that you've never met. And I would say you are their mentor. Like, you're in their ear more often and in their head more often than many other people, if they're consistently listening to manager tools, career tools, etc. So don't sell yourself short. You are many, many people's mentor.
It is, people come up to me when we have a public conference or client conference, and they've been listening for years, and they come up and say, hi, Mark, it's such a thrill to meet you. I kind of roll my eyes, and they say, I feel like I know you. And of course they know me. And I say to them, yes, but I don't know you. I don't know who you are. And then they say, oh, I'm so sorry. And they tell me their story. And if you'd ever told me that I'd be listened to by millions and get emails every week, sometimes every day, particularly now in this particular time where we're trying to expand the number of people we can reach, because managers and professionals need a lot of help right now because of the pandemic. I am humbled every day by the notes we get about people who say regularly, you changed my life. And I could retire right then and just hold on to that thought. The idea, one of my favorite phrases is what will we put on earth to do if not to help one another through? And
great quote.
So I feel very blessed.
Well, the final comment I'll make just on this topic, and I'm not saying this just to stroke your ego, is you are a modern Peter Drucker, right? Like, you're doing things differently than he did, in the sense that he didn't have a podcast platform to use as his way to get his message out. But your message is as large and as followed and as kind of respected as a lot of the things that Peter Drucker put out there.
That's very kind. I think his focus was on executives, people at the very top. And as you know, our focus is on everybody below them, on the managers and individual contributors.
But I'd argue those people need a lot more help than
they do. I would agree.
You're serving a greater purpose in many ways.
Well, no, nobody's ever served a greater purpose to the world in the business world than
fair. Okay, so when we talked a few months ago, you mentioned the term lean living, and I love that term. I'm curious, first off, that term stuck with me just when you mentioned it. It's just got a nice sort of ring to it, the idea of lean living and how that ties into a lot of the things that our community believes in and sort of strives for. Where did you hear that term, or where did you come up with that? What made you kind of start thinking about that concept?
I just made it up.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, you know how things get invented. People make things up. The reason I said it, if you want the backstory, what happened is, lean manufacturing, lean supply chains, and so on. And I happen to be, when I think about money, separate from the professional managerial part of budgets and profits and costs and spend rates and so on, I spend so much time there that a lot of my learning that I could apply to my home life is from that. And lean is a classic business term. It's classic in the last 25 years to suggest frugality. I mean, the leaning out of the supply chain is, in fact, one of the most important trends that's happened in the last 30 years. And unfortunately, right now, it's hurting us in terms of, the supply chain is being disrupted because stuff that's supposed to be coming from China wasn't able to come over because of restrictions. So to me, this was just applying the business principles, the managerial principles, the fiduciary responsibility principles of our professional lives to our personal lives. And I suspect there are many people, many managers, many hundreds of thousands, probably millions of managers in the world who go to work and think about budgets and look at their budgets. And at times like these, worry about whether there's enough budget to continue to employ everybody. And yet they go home and maybe there's a budget, but it's not really looked at, or spending is not really looked at. And so to me, it was just importing that idea. And because I speak and write for a living, the alliteration of lean living worked for me. So that's where it came from.
I like it. It's catchy.
And right now, golly gee, if everybody practiced the kinds of principles you guys were talking about, which, by the way, has given me incredible satisfaction lately, the amount of stuff I can cut out of my budget. I mean, here's an example of lean living, and I'll use my example. We use iPhones at the company. We're a Mac or an Apple shop, which Apple is very happy to hear, by the way. They're a big client of ours. And I don't mean to be no negatives to my friends at Microsoft. We have plenty of Microsoft products here too. But, on your iPhone, click on settings. When the settings come up, the very top thing is your account information, probably has your picture on it. Click on that. And the fourth thing down on the list is subscriptions. This didn't exist, by the way, 5 to 7 years ago in the previous iOS versions. But now you can see every subscription that you're subscribed to through your Apple ID. And it gives you the ability to just cancel them. I just saved $200 a month getting rid of subscriptions I don't need. Now, some of them I could argue I could use. I miss my Major League Baseball subscription, but I think it's like $25 a month. Now, as it happens right now, Major League Baseball isn't playing. I'm a big Dodger fan and a big baseball fan. And I used to, I would get alerts and so on. And it's one of my vices, knowing baseball, less of a vice than golf. But I had some golf scoring apps that I had tested out a while ago and had never canceled them. And they were $5 a year. And a couple of them were coming due in April. So I canceled those. And I can still write my golf score on a scorecard, on a paper scorecard. I don't need the app. I don't need MajorLeagueBaseball.com. And I'm not even sure, in light of what I'm experiencing now as a business owner, that I'll ever go back to it. Oh, maybe at some point. But I'll tell you what, if I go back to it, I'll know exactly what the cost is, which at the time that I did it, when Major League Baseball came out with the app, I didn't think twice. I said, that's something I want. And for the record, guys, I don't have a ton of apps. All of my apps fit on one screen. I'm amazed when people look at their iPhone and scroll left and right through screens and screens and screens and screens of apps. Now, I have a couple of clusters. I have one for utilities and one for entertainment. And the entertainment is things like a chess game. I like to play chess, and my Kindle software and podcasts and Apple Music and so on. But I just got rid of all kinds of things. I mean, just left and right. I had to keep a few entertainment channels because my wife and I like to watch TV together at night. And nowadays we watch almost no cable TV. So we watch Stars or Hulu or HBO or something like that, which costs a little bit of money. So I kept those, but I saved $200. Right. Actually, I saved $400 that I would have had to pay in subscription renewal in the next year. And I saved $200 a month. And
wow.
That's free cash flow.
Yeah.
Now,
that's awesome.
when you pay for those things, you say, oh, it's $1 or it's $2. But in times like these, every buck counts. Get rid of it. Get rid of it. Get rid of it. And then, I told the story to our company as we were going through an exercise. One of our most popular podcasts right now is called Race, Don't Chase. And the concept is simple. When the market turns and things start going down, what you're supposed to do is cut your expenses faster than your revenue drops. In other words, you race your revenues to the bottom of the market so that you can be profitable even when your revenue is going down, which is a very hard thing to do, but it's a fundamental principle of executive life. Any executive worth his or her salt knows the comment, race, don't chase. When people listen to it for the first time, managers who have never been exposed to it because they haven't gone to executive learning or whatever, they're astounded that race, don't chase exists. And once you teach them that, they never forget it. Well, same thing's true. You're buying some things and you're not thinking at all about $1 or $2. But right now, we want to race revenues downward, and we want our expenses to be cut faster than our revenues so that we can be profitable, even by a little bit, so that when the market returns, we have capital available to invest in things. But you guys have all probably seen, or at least been exposed to, these shows that were popular. They may still be popular. I don't tend to see cable TV, about hoarders, people who psychologically, unfortunately, bless their hearts, they're mentally not stable. And so their houses end up just crammed with, really, unfortunately, many things that are important to them, but a lot of things that are just trash or unuseful. But they have an unhealthy mental attachment to these things. Well, the solution to hoarding is a bit like my approach to financial cost cutting. The solution, by the way, is you don't go through and say, should I keep this or should I not keep this? What they do is they take everything out of the house and then say, now you have to make case for getting it back in there. That's the way to cut your spending. Get rid of everything.
Like zero-based budgeting.
Yeah, exactly. What's funny about zero-based budgeting, though, Maggie, is very few people have heard it. You have heard of it. I have heard of it. A lot of people haven't. And
Mike's definitely heard of it.
Well, a lot of people have heard of it, but there are very few places. There are people that talk about it, but very few places actually have the guts to do it. But it's a very healthy exercise because Peter Drucker, here we go. Peter Drucker says, you do not control costs, you cut costs. So now's the time to cut. If there was ever a time, and I'll be honest, I've only been in the professional world for 40 years, but this right now, what we are facing is the single greatest economic downturn we have ever faced. It dwarfs 9/11. It dwarfs 2008. This is it. Okay. If you guys watch the movie Margin Call, there's a part where Jeremy Irons playing the CEO says, this is it. I know the government's going to try to do a great deal, but for a lot of people, the government's efforts won't really touch them. So now's the time to cut, and to cut unceremoniously, painfully, without regard for hurt feelings, because heaven forbid you run out of cash and you're looking for a job and you run out of cash. And now you have to take a job, and now you're definitely no longer financially independent. We tell people 6 months. My recommendation today is it probably ought to be a year. And if I need to say it, I'll punch people in the nose the way Mike likes to say I do. And I'll say, you need to live poor for a while, for a long while, until you build up a year's worth of cushion in cash, not in the market. Okay. Not in your retirement account, but in cash that you can get at a moment's notice, so that if your boat gets overturned, you can be at peace and make good choices about your career. And you can turn down jobs that would pay you, but aren't right. And for most people, I think a year is absolutely long enough.
Yeah, I agree. So we want to, God, there's something you said that I was going to comment on, but I lost it.
I talk too much.
But when you were talking about zero-based budgeting and how a lot of people haven't heard that term, I was thinking a lot of people have heard it in the past 2 weeks. They had never heard it before then.
Yeah, sure. That's right.
Or they're going to hear it in the coming 2
Yeah, they are. The storm is coming. La tormenta.
Yes. Yeah. If you've not felt it yet, it's here, and more of it's coming.
Yeah, I mean, the news is 3.8 million people have filed for unemployment benefits. Now, companies have gotten smart, and they're now not announcing layoffs, or actually legally, a lot of companies, public companies, are required to announce layoffs. But even if you announced a layoff because you were a big company, the chances that it would get covered are pretty small because of the burden of covering the pandemic. And so a lot of companies laid people off, and it didn't really make news. Now, Macy's was in the news. They furloughed virtually all of their workers. Furlough is a bad word, I think, right now. It attempts to soften what is an inevitable layoff. But the reason Macy's got mentioned is because it is a business to consumer business. I mean, consumers know Macy's, but there have already been more hotel workers laid off in the last month than were laid off in 2008 and 9/11 combined. And I don't want to say it's a depression, but it won't astound me if we face a depression. It's definitely going to be a recession. There's not a single person that I've talked to, and I've talked to hundreds, maybe I'm up to 1,000 now in the last 3 weeks. There's not a single person that I respect, admire, appreciate, seek advice and guidance from that didn't say, oh yeah, this is going to be bad. So now's the time. And of course, there's an old saying, the worst time to give birth to a son is 18 months before a war. Well, nobody knows that. So the worst time in the world to be without cash is right now. So you can't do anything about your cash position now. You can do something about your spending, but your spending not only has to be cut to weather this little storm we got coming, but you also have to change. We have to change our behaviors so that you have the cash for the next one. And it's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
On that point, I want to wrap up with a question that is following up on a couple points you made where you were just talking about some of your lessons over life.
Mm-hmm.
You spoke about wisdom and how much you have at different ages throughout your life. I'm curious at this point, what are the top couple of pieces of life advice that you would want to give people, or even thinking about your kids, right? What are the things that you really want them to listen and soak up and make sure that you are imparting upon them?
Tell the truth. You start there. Okay. The second rule is be kind. Okay. Now, You can't be kind. You have less ability to be kind if you have less resources. Okay. So that to me, telling the truth, if you're desperate, you're much more willing to break that barrier and start fibbing. And kindness is much easier if you feel like you're secure, including financially. When it comes to money, save. Do not fall into the trap that the things you have will bring you joy. Joy is an internal prospect, and unfortunately, not enough is talked about spiritual joy anymore, but spiritual joy matters, internal joy. But trust me, the financial guidance is right. If you're going to spend money for fun or for joy or for happiness, spend it on an experience, not on a thing. The best example of a world of excess is people not having a lot of money, but having a storage unit that they pay to rent with all the stuff that they can't fit into their house. But look, tell the truth, be kind to other people, give and give and give until it hurts. If you do those things, you're going to lead a good life, and you don't have to be rich. As my mom had a thing on her, above her desk. One of me or my brothers gave it to her. I don't know who. It says, I've been rich and I've been poor, and rich is better. But it's actually the wrong way to measure. The question is, how many lives have you made better? And it's much easier to make other people's lives better if your resources are well in hand, and that includes financial resources.
I love it. Tell the truth, be kind, save, give. And I love the question of how many lives have you made better?
Yeah.
So I lied. That was not technically the last question, but it was very close to it.
That's okay.
Here's why. We typically do something that we call Mike's Minute on the Mic, where I get to ask Mike a question. He gets 60 seconds to answer it.
Okay.
Instead, we're going to do, your name's so close, we're going to do Mark's Minute on the Mic.
Okay.
And you have 60 seconds to answer this question as best as you can. Is a little bit of a selfish question. As someone who's been running an incredibly successful podcast for over a decade, what advice do you have for Mike and I, who launched a podcast 3 months ago?
Don't listen to the common wisdom. There's a saying, don't sit down to think about what you're going to write. Sit down to write about what you think. So trust yourself. Decide what topics you're going to do the research, and then put them out there. Some people will listen, some people don't. Don't listen to your detractors. I got called a racist today in an email, which was just impossibly stupid. And you can't listen to all the detractors, okay? You cannot win by trying to get listeners. Do what you believe is right. Talk about what your passion is, and you will draw people who are similarly passionate. Don't think that this is only a one-way medium. In other words, answer every email you get. I sent out a note to our community the other day, and I spent 6 or 7 hours this weekend answering emails, and I answered every single one of them. Human beings crave relationships. They think they have a relationship with you. They don't, but you can create that relationship by responding to them. So ask for input. And look, ignore 99.9% of the comments. Some people have an inordinate ability to do what is known as a compliment. And that is, I really love what you're doing, but, okay, just ignore the but. Okay. You're not going to please everybody. Your job is not to please everybody. You've got to be who you are and be passionate about what you're doing. And you will draw people to you who share your interest. And what's more important in terms of your ability to influence the world is your ability to influence other people who are so passionate and so much appreciative of what you do. They influence other people. It's that second and third knock-on effect that really matters. And I'll say something else, which no one else does, but you won't like it, but don't take ads. Okay. Don't try to don't worry about monetizing.
Don't
about
worry,
influencing.
we've not had that problem yet, so nobody wants to advertise on our podcast.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding, but I appreciate the spirit of what you're saying. And awesome advice, so thank you very much. I remember the other day you saying to me, don't listen to your detractors, and that has definitely stuck with me.
Yeah. Now, look, I'm not everybody's cup of tea. Some people who are listening, I don't like that guy. I know that not everybody likes me. But as I would say, the people who like me or like our stuff really like us. So, the danger, of course, is you start searching for what you can do to please everybody. And the problem with pleasing other people is you end up turning over your sense of satisfaction to them, and they don't know you. And you have to be able to look in the mirror at night and say, was I ethical today? Was I kind today? Was I an example setter? Those are the questions that define people's lives.
Yeah. Well, Mark, I just cannot thank you enough. This has been incredibly enlightening. You've shared so many great thoughts and pieces of wisdom with us and our listeners. And we just really want to thank you for your time, which I know is incredibly valuable, and just your willingness to come on and speak with us. I was honored that you asked. I don't do this very often. I think this is only the third or fourth podcast I've ever been on. But I'm happy to help. And it means a lot to me that I can help a friend. And what you guys are doing is important. I'll never forget Mike kidding you about you cutting off a shampoo bottle. But I'm telling you guys, I can afford a lot of shampoo. I happen to use Suave because I don't have a lot of hair. But I'll tell you something. I'm doing it. Nice. I'll tell you why. It's a couple of pennies here and there. And it starts to add up. And I'm not embarrassed. Why not? Why shouldn't I get full value out of the shampoo I bought or the toothpaste I bought? I think I mentioned to you, I'm not buying Gatorade anymore. I'm not buying bottled water. Actually, we are buying bottled water. My wife likes it, but I'm not using it. So guess what? All of our bottled water will now last twice as long. I can drink water out of the tap. I heard you talking about the bottled water on the Career Tools podcast with your daughter. I want you to get your wife a Berkey as a present and see if she'll quit bottled water.
What is a Berkey?
A Berkey, it's a really, not high-end as an expensive, but it's a really high-end water filtration container or unit that you can just sit on a counter. And you literally could put like Dirty Creek water in it and drink it, and it takes out. It will make it clear and very healthy. And
well, one of my rules is happy wife, happy life. And if my wife wants to drink bottled water, I'll mention it, but I'm not going to push it because my thinking is we have enough spending in this household. If I just marshal myself, we'll have all kinds of free cash flow. And if you know anything about business, free cash flow is a wonderful thing. And guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to invest it back in the business. I'm going to invest it in my financial security so that the next time something happens, I can do even more. I'm not worried about Manager Tools income. I'm worried about Manager Tools customers, Manager Tools listeners. That's what, if there's anything that's going to keep me up at night, it's how are our listeners doing? How can I help them? Now, we run the risk, certainly, of giving and giving and giving, and people thinking, well, the balance of payments sort of favors the people who are listening. I said, and if that's what happens and they get rich and I don't care. If that's what I'm going to be judged on, I'm all right with that.
Mark, I really appreciate the time. This was an amazing interview and definitely took away a lot of great learnings.
Guys, I'm thrilled to do it. I love what you guys are doing, and anything I do to help you, let me know. Thank
you so much, Mark. We really appreciate it. We hope you have an awesome night.
You too.
See you later. Thank you so much.